The thing is, European control is being exercised through the banking system and the money markets, the exchange rates, and also through the military, especially with France. But really, it's an illusion. It's based on a false illusion and a false consciousness. There's really no way for any European country or even the European Union or the rest of the world to control Africa anymore. There's no possibility of that. So the only way they can do it is through corruption. You find one individual in government and pay them or lobby them to make a law in your favor or to make a contract in your favor. So it's through corruption they can control. But if it wasn't for that, there is absolutely no way. And you remember, they're not doing this to Africans only, they're doing it to everybody else. And I don't think Europeans in general want that to happen also, because most of them are not crooked. And remember that the control they have is really something that was manufactured very recently. The first settlers who came to Kenya, for instance, the Bazungu who were brought from Ireland and Scotland and England and settled in the highlands. The same year they were brought, 1910, 1909, they found they would take them over into the countryside, dump them there, they give them resources, and they start building. This is what they were doing in that time, because they had already pacified the Kikuyu and the Maasai, and even us here. But what happened was that the Bazungu they brought, the whites who were brought there, within weeks, were already speaking Swahili. Not only that, they began dressing like Maasai. Not only that, they stopped building and went and stayed with the Maasai in the kraals. So now there was an incident where they would say there's a market day in Nairobi, and the Africans would come to shop, and they would come with their white wives and white husbands, and everybody is dressed the same. So the British administrators were shocked, and they said, these people have become native. So they filed a complaint, and that's when they passed a rule in 1911 prohibiting miscegenation. That is, no cultural mixing, no racial mixing. Had that law not been passed, the whites who came here would have now been assimilated. They would all be called Kagwa or I don't know, Mukasa, you know. The situation where whites continue to exist as a separate race of people in Africa is a product of legislation. It's not a natural situation. There is no way to enforce that. The only way to prevent people from marrying each other is by force, by this law. That's how the enforcement happened. But in fact, if they had not done that, even the colonial project would have failed. I mean, they went into Kenya and they found people already pierced with their ears and their Maasai, and they're like, oh, no, we're not from, England, very nice, but we're now from here, that's it, don't bother us. And the British were pissed off and they said no. So they actually had to go break people's families up and warn them and stop them from mixing. So the thing is this, that European control has happened through a fluke of corruption and of going against human nature, of doing things that are against the normal instinct of a human being. So, but that's not sustainable. European control will end, and what will happen, what will replace it is normal trade, fair trade. You do something for me nicely, I pay you. If we are friends, maybe our children will stay together, maybe not, but there is none of that I control you and you're my subject and I can steal from you anytime. That has to end. So we have gotten to a point where the system is now very transparent in terms of how you see things. But corruption is what's being used here. Now, the fastest way for Africans to break the yoke of this corruption is to have standard rules all across the continent. That means they cannot use one African state against others, which means we need to have a unified Africa. So the African Union is the way forward. Already in 2016, they introduced an African passport. You know that some people have them here. There's East African passport, there's also African Union passport. So basically if you have African Union passport, you can travel to any part of Africa without any kind of restrictions. You just have to show your passport and you can cross the border. There's no visa requirements, there's no payments, you just go. But that needs to happen more. It needs to happen more. We need to have a single currency, we need to have a single army. We need to have procurement systems where if somebody wants to buy, say, a piece of equipment, they have to put the tender on an African Union site so that Africans can sell them these things instead of going to Europe first. So before you can sell your vegetables abroad, let the African who's your neighbor have first choice. If he fails to buy it, then you can sell it abroad. This is the system, but we don't have that system now because each one of the 55 African states in the African Union has a different procurement system. And when they're doing tenders, they're put on maybe one website here or they do it in the newspaper. So if you're not actually here, you can't do anything. You know, a European can come or a Chinese person and get a tender to construct a road, but a road construction company in Kigali or in Nairobi or in Tanzania or in Egypt won't get that contract. And that contract would be cheaper for them if it was available. And the quality of work would be the same. So what's failing us now is that we're not integrated. We need to integrate our economies so that we can save these kinds of, we can save funds and save time and effort and energy and allow us to grow our companies and corporations. So that's what we need to do. We need to have unity and integration. But it's coming. It's coming. They're mixing now the electrical grid all across Africa. It's being connected. I think when you're driving here, you may have seen very massive poles. Those ones go all the way to South Africa. Huge, gigantic poles of wires. And they're going to be connecting with Inga Dam in the Congo, which is going to be the largest dam in Africa, electric generating dam. So once they do that, and the electricity becomes cheaper than it is now, it will be very easy to set up light industry in Africa. Anybody could go and start a manufacturing farm. Because, you know, when electricity was expensive in the 80s in Uganda, nobody could make doors. This fabrication industry, it's only come about because of electric power. And electric power in Kampala and Kasese are cheap. That's where the fabrication is, in the town centers where power is available. But if it became cheaper, people would leave the city centers and they would go outside. Yeah. So you know, that's how we break the control. We break it through having an economy that's viable, and by having an economy that's rational and advantageous to us. And the only way to do that is to integrate Africa economically and politically and financially and in every other way, and militarily as well. We need to have one single army under the control of the African Union. So that way you can't approach some army commander and say take over Mali or take over Guinea or whatever. That should end. And if somebody does a coup, then you send the whole army there and say, no coup. You go have an election. You know, that needs to happen here.
Well, let me hear you say mountain, mountain.